when you were a kid, when did you start listening to music, or what kind of music did you start listening to?
Well, I started actually in grade school. I remember like being like maybe second grade and third grade, like discovering like Van Halen and like Billy Squier, like anything like with heavy guitar,
Right.
And so that was kind of like around my grade school, and like, some of the kids, they were listening to kind of like the heavy metal or like the hard rock that was coming out of like the late 70s. And then, but my sister at the time was involved in the San Francisco punk scene, and she's 7 years older than me. So she was involved in a scene that was San Francisco, but more kind of the peninsula. So it was like the suburbs of San Francisco. And we would have punks over to the house, and for me, 7 years younger, I was always just like, whoa, who are these, people over at the house, and like everybody's got crazy hair and bands written on the back of their jackets. And everybody was really nice to me. They all kind of like took me under their wing and stuff. So it was actually like pretty cool. And then she snuck me out to a show when I was in fifth grade. So that would have been like maybe 83, I think.
Do you remember which show it was?
Social Unrest, Half Church, the Popo Pies. No, I think it was the Twisting Jacks, which was like post Popo Pies, I think, and some other stuff at the Varsity Theater, which is like in Palo Alto. And so there was still a scene back then, like in Mountain View and around Stanford University.
Right.
And as she started getting more out of it, so she was kind of getting into like more kind of like dark, like wave stuff, or like 45 Grave or Christian Death. She was like giving me her records. So I was getting records back then and just kind of getting turned on to stuff. And from that point, still just kind of experimenting on my own, like going to the record store and just trying to like case out the record covers and think like, okay, is this going to be like fast and aggressive, or is this going to be like new wave, or, like just trying to figure it out on my own,
right.
from that point forward.
Yeah, and I guess 625 was kind of the label was created to document the Bay Area scene at first, right?
Yeah, mainly because no one was putting out our records back then. So if we didn't do it, like they wouldn't have been done. So yeah,
right. And then the label was actually pretty consistently putting stuff out for like I would say like, I mean, from what I remember, a good 8 or 9 years. Yeah. And then it slowed down a bit when you chose to pursue your career in academia. And did, with everything that was going on, did you ever consider maybe that the label just didn't need to happen anymore? Or?
Well, even by that point, even by the late 90s, but particularly in the early 2000s, there was a lot of labels already operating, there. So like if I wasn't putting something out, Gloom would put it out, or Youth Attack, or Deranged, or like, all these different labels in the early 2000s, even in the late 90s, whether there was a lot of, smaller power violence and grindcore labels, that had come up by that point. So I felt okay when things started slowing down, because, before I felt that if I didn't put something out, it might not come out. It just might exist as a tape or something like that. But, by the late 90s or particularly the early 2000s, there was just already enough people like doing stuff. So I felt like, okay, about like, well, I'm going to step back and, this is going to continue without me. And, I've kind of done my time and like, put in my, contribution and stuff like that. And so I felt okay with it about then, but I continued actually to release stuff even while I was in academia.
Yeah.
And, I felt like irresponsible because I wasn't doing it 100%. I wasn't like sending out 25 promo packs to like college radio and magazines and stuff like that. And I felt like I was doing a disservice to the bands that I was working with. But, those bands kind of, they're either friends or, they were just excited to be working with me and I with them. And so they were okay with that. But I still felt like, like I was kind of doing a disservice to them. And that's one of the reasons why I started, just this year to try and pick it up, more.
Right. Pursuing your academic career, it took you like all over the place, right? I mean, I know you were in Japan, you were in New York for a little while.
Yeah.
Was it ever like hard to, leave your home state of California?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, San Francisco shaped me,
Yeah.
It was like the late 80s, mid 80s, late 80s scene is still the music that I listen to, early Attitude Adjustment and Christ on Parade and early Neurosis. And I mean, all Special Forces, all that stuff just kind of shaped me. And also Tim Yohannan and Maximum Rock and Roll shaped a lot of my politics. And they came out of that San Francisco scene because San Francisco was quite kind of, radical and also leftist. We had problems with like Nazi skins and all that kind of stuff, but there was always a strong like anarchist presence and anti-fascist presence and stuff. And so just being like a kid, trying to figure out what the world is and where you are in it, that shaped me, and so leaving that was hard. But also, the thing is perhaps you can relate to this about your own neighborhood. I'm not sure where you live, but the Bay Area has changed so completely much that I hardly recognize it anymore. And it's still got a great scene and really good bands, but it's I go back and it's unrecognizable, because of Google and the whole earlier the .com business, but all the software companies and stuff. So rents are super high. There's not a lot of punks and artists. Yeah.
The Mission is like a completely different place now.
Totally different. I mean, going to shows in the Mission, Epicenter, the record store that Tim Yohannan started, being in the Mission, going there in the early days, you kind of had to navigate some stuff. Like you saw some shit go down and hopefully you weren't in the middle of it,
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine that now, at all.
DMs are like your new like letters from around the world. Because I mean that you are on Instagram now, and do you find people reach out to you a lot through Instagram?
They do now. Yeah, my good friend Brian from Bad Skulls and a million different bands, Shit Coffins and Mutilated Tongue and and all that. We were talking earlier this year, like when a bunch of shit went down, health wise, the virus was circulating and all this kind of stuff. And we had reached out because friends were just checking in with each other. And he said, dude, if you're not on social media, like you don't exist, like your label doesn't exist. So he convinced me to get on Instagram. And the minute that I got on, sure enough, people that I hadn't talked to in 20, 30 years, started messaging me and stuff like that. So I do feel like, it is kind of like letters around the world, but, with letters, you had to be a lot more deliberate, it took time to write out a handwritten letter and like you stuffed it with stickers and all different kinds of things that you could collect from your local scene, and you would do artwork on the envelope and all that kind of stuff. It was just more deliberate. Now things are just so fast and instantaneous. You do get like a lot of people just being like, check out my band, release my band or something. And I'm like, well, who are you? And, like, let's tell me about where you're from and what scene, like what's going on, I miss that, but it is true. Like DM is, I mean, it's crazy. Before like getting a letter from the Philippines or something in the 90s was like mind blowing,
right.
And now you get, DMs from everywhere throughout the world, right. And it's like, no big thing now,
Does the music or, like, let's say a particular genre, like, of the stuff that you listen to sometimes, or maybe even like stuff you get sent in for like demos or whatever. Does it ever like start to sound all the same? Like, does it all sound the same to you at all?
Yeah. Yeah, you know. I mean, there was a time in the late 90s where like every tape I got sounded like Charles Bronson. You know what I mean? It was, you know, a fast band that was really good with a really high pitched screamy singer, you know, and you would just pop it in and you'd be like, Bronson, you know, like they're listening to Bronson, you know, and if you listen to Bronson, you'd be like, they're listening to the Neos, you know, but like, you know, but by the 90s it had turned into Bronson, you know, and then after that, it was like a lot of bands that had been listening to, you know, things like Rambo or something like that. And then, you know, lately a lot of grindcore bands, you know, there's a certain style of grindcore now, which is really well recorded for how like recording technology has come, you know, for DIY releases and stuff, you know, but it's all like quite technical and constant like blasting and, you know, just, you know, apart from the logos, it all kind of starts blending into one at some point, you know, and you're constantly looking for that one that kind of stands out that's doing something like, you know, different or whatnot.
Can you name any bands that you're kind of stoked on right now?
Like new bands?
Yeah.
I love this band from, so, you know, I live in Burlington, Vermont now, which I would have never imagined in a million years. In fact, I couldn't even find Vermont on a map before I got the job here. So now I live in Burlington, Vermont. That's got like quite a long punk scene, you know, which I've been learning about, and like has a volunteer run or had a like a community space, you know, 242 Main, which like a bunch of bands in the early 80s, you know, had come through and played and all this kind of stuff. And so it's been really good to kind of just like learn about a new scene and be somebody that's like not of it. So I'm just like a fan, just kind of like navigating it and researching it and stuff. And there's a family here. There's like three brothers from a family with the name of Hackney. So there's the Hackney brothers here, and they've done a ton of bands here. And, you know, they're all like hardcore kids who skate. And, you know, they've done kind of like a proto kind of punk blues band called Rough Francis here. But they got a side band called Last World that I absolutely love. And they've done a bunch of recordings, and they got a great recording without vocals. And I'm trying my damnedest to get them to finish the vocals so we can put it out and just get like Last World out there. So I'm into that. I'm into, I mean, there's so many bands in Tokyo since I go back there often that, you know, I get to see, you know, new bands that I'm like super into. There's a band from Nagoya called Murmur. So Murmur, the U's have umlauts, and they're just like great power violence. Yeah, it's like super, super good, you know, and like into Dread Eye from Tokyo. I'm into the Communicates. I'm into like all the bands there. And I'm just amazed by like how many good bands there are, you know, just you know, fucking who rips. I'm wearing their shirt right now, actually. Harm from LA.
Oh, I haven't checked them out yet, but I have heard of them.
Dude, I mean, the minute I heard them and I heard Excruciating Terror in the back of my head, I was like, oh my God, this is like, you know, and Harm is like one of the best bands I've heard in like the last like decade. And I reached out to them, and they're all super nice dudes. And it's just, you know, it's like a younger generation, but you know, you just meet nice, you know, people, you know, and like by just hearing their band, you know, their references, you know, like you already know, like I'm going to like these dudes, you know, personally, because you know, and you reach out to them, and sure enough, it's like talking to, you know, a longtime friend or something, you know, it's just somebody that you met. So I would have to say as far as like Los Angeles goes, Harm is just fucking killing it, man.
What advice would you give to somebody who was thinking about starting a label?
Don't, maybe that could be the first one. You know, it all depends. I mean, there's all different kinds of labels. It all depends on what you what you're hoping to do. But for me, if somebody wants to do a label somewhat within the same kind of realm, let's say of 625 or whatever that history was,
yeah,
don't live off it, because you're not going to be able to. And the decisions you make in order to do so are going to so drastically change the label that you're either going to fold and fuck up business wise, or it's going to become something that's irrecognizable from, or unrecognizable from, where you started. So just, it's just a super expensive hobby, it's still, from day one, I've just been a fan, and all the bands that I played in before was just an expression for me being a fan. And the label is still just, like with Harm, I reached out to them. I was like, I love you guys. I want to release something from you just because I like you so much, not that I'm trying to compete with other labels or try and get them signed or anything like that. It's just, if you're doing it for the love of it, just do it for the love of it, and keep your day job, set aside some money, hopefully that money will keep the label going and stuff, and just, do it authentically and do it for the love of it. I guess that would be my advice.